Dear ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am very grateful for this invitation and for opportunity to give this plenary lecture. Why my title is In the Shadow of Constantinople? I think that Constantinople, as a relatively new imperial capital and a seat of the imperial court, played a pivotal role in shaping the relationship between politics and religion, also in eastern provinces of the Eastern Roman Empire, particularly in Syria and Egypt, and that this influence could be still seen at least until the end of the 19th century, before the great changes in the 20th century, already mentioned also by Mr. Mufti Poric. And so the influence of Constantinople could easily be even underestimated in this regard. The second part of my title regards to the time framework and the period between Theodosius the Great and Herakleus is a quite common division in the framework of the Eastern Roman history, because Theodosius the Great greatly contributed to the emergence of Constantinople as a paramount Christian center, and on the other hand, Herakleus I both reconquered and ultimately lost the eastern provinces of his empire to Arabs, thus reducing his empire in size, and on the other hand gave this empire new characteristic as a primary Greek and also Orthodox empire, and these characteristics remained in place till the very end of the Byzantine Empire in the 15th century. But to fully grasp the development of the complicated relationship between politics and religion in the Eastern Roman Near East from the time of Theodosius, it is necessary to say something about the key features of the development of relationship between Christian Church and political authority from the very beginning of Christianity in the 1st century AD. There are many commonplaces in regard to this development and to the relationship between Christian Church and Roman political authorities itself. Two common places are particularly obstinate. The first one is the emphasis on the role of Constantine the Great as a pioneer of a new understanding of relationship between Christian Church and a Roman state. And even today, in present-day debates, the notion of the so-called Constantinian Church is quite common. The second commonplace is the depiction of the history of Christian Church, mainly as a history of struggles between more or less weak secular rulers and courageous church leaders like monks, bishops, and at least in Catholic case, also of popes. Of course, both these commonplaces have their merits, but they don't say all the truth. It is true, it is quite impossible to overrate the role of Constantine the Great and of his so-called conversion, but it must be also said that the development of positive attitude of Christians towards political authorities didn't start with Constantine. On the other hand, although struggles between secular and religious leaders in the history of Christian churches, of course, occurred. They weren't so common that is usually thought. And thus, it is important to underscore that loyalty to political authorities was present in Christian communities since the very beginning, and it also found a very early expression in the Epistle to Romans, already from the 50s of the first century. Of course, there were some currents inside the Christian communities which pointed to the need of strict separation between Christians and political authorities, and especially of Christians and the Roman Empire, where the majority of them lived in first centuries of the church. But this current, particularly expressed in the book of Apocalypse, never gained upper hand historically. So the Christians found themselves compelled to underscore their loyalty to existing political authorities. There was a particular reason for that, because they weren't able to compromise with the Roman Empire on one particular important point, and that was the point of the imperial cult, because a Christian could not partake in this imperial cult. Of course, we can imagine that in everyday life such compromises occurred, but they weren't possible in theory. So even Tertullian, whose relationships to the Roman Empire is rather complicated, underscores this complete and even exaggerated loyalty of Christians to the Roman Empire, even in comparison to their pagan compatriots. The second issue that emerges from this important circumstances that the so-called conversion of Constantine in the beginning of the 4th century didn't change a lot the attitude of Christians to politics, but it did, of course, change the attitude of the Roman Empire to the church. Because earlier, Roman authorities mainly chose to ignore the Christian communities, or even, of course, persecuted them, although centralized persecutions were quite uncommon till the period of at least the Emperor Valerianus, or even till the period of Diocletian. And although Christians were mainly loyal to political authorities and also participated in some aspects of public life, the next key feature is that they indeed had a long and enduring experience of life outside the mainstream of society, and especially outside the mainstream of political life. This is very important. I think this issue couldn't be overrated again, because this experience is quite different from the experience of their pagan compatriots, and on the other hand, they shared many aspects of this experience with the Jews, who also used to live in areas under rule of rulers who weren't Jews, of course. And on the other hand, I also think that this experience divides Christians from many Muslims, especially in the first centuries of Islam. And the combination of the early expressed loyalty to every political authority on one hand, and of the Christians being used to life outside the mainstream is also a key feature of the life of Christian communities in the present, even in the present day Middle East, because they are used to be loyal to political authority in the hands of the people who aren't their co-believers, and at the same time they maintain many spaces of their life that are outside mainstream. And I hope that I will be able to return to this at the end of my lecture. Now, in regard to political authority after the conversion of Constantine, it is important to know that Constantine the Great, of course, in the first place, converted, if he converted, for his personal reasons. At the same time, he also saw the strength of Christianity in the aftermath of the great persecution under particularly Diocletian and Galerius, and saw his strength of survival. So it is possible to say that Constantine reckoned with Christianity as a vital new force with the power to strengthen the empire as a whole. But there was at least one point Constantine never fully understood. And this is in connection to what Hans-Georg Beck said, that Constantine didn't enter the church through the main gate. He found his own gate to the church, or even never found that gate. And so he didn't fully grasp many aspects of Christian life. And one particularly important was that Christianity, of course, wasn't at any time of its existence a unified force, a monolithic structure, like perhaps some aspects of the earlier pagan cults. And Constantine was surprised to see that he mobilized a new, strong, vital, increasing in size force, but on the other hand, he also inherited its internal problems, which arose from many divisions which originated already in the Apostolic Age. And he, during his lifetime, expected to heal this problem by finding the common accepted solution for the inner Christian divisions and to establish such unified force he envisioned. He was probably strong enough to create such an illusion. it must be said that the phenomenon of Constantine in the history of Christianity is truly unique, because he was credited by many, especially by many in the East, with liberating Christians from the horrific waves of persecutions, and thus he was established by many as a kind of mediator between God and people. In many ways and in many depictions, he is seen as someone who is actually over the church, not inside the church. The Eusebian vision of Constantine is most well known, but there are others as well, and perhaps to read the beginning of the Mortibus Persecutorum by Lactantius can help us to understand how surprising this new development was for Christians and how grateful they were to their liberators. And Constantine, during his lifetime, mainly managed to maintain this authority, managed to maintain this illusion that an emperor can, in fact, lead the church, can, in fact, somehow rule the church. But when Constantine died, this illusion quickly disappeared. Constantine's successors, and this is another key feature of the development of relationships between Christian church and political authorities, didn't have his authority. No one after Constantine. This has, of course, many reasons. One reason is that these personalities immediately after Constantine, especially Constance and Constantine II, were much weaker than their father. And the second circumstance is that, of course, the expectations which were common among Christians immediately after the conversion of Constantine didn't materialize. New era was, as in many cases in later history, also, for instance, after 989, were not so much better that it was expected immediately after the conversion of Constantine. So no other ruler than Constantine could ever expect to be regarded as someone who is between God and his church. That was only possible for Constantine, and that was only possible for Constantine in some circles, especially in the East, to much lesser degree in the West, which is even today reflected by the fact that Constantine is saint only in the Eastern and not in the Western Church. So the role of church leaders increased during the 4th century, and the role of ruler, the emperor, decreased in both parts of empire after the death of Constantine. And this is very visible in some landmarks. I'm going to speak about them after that. Nevertheless, the continuity, and that's the next key feature of the development of relationships between Christian church and political authorities, relevant also for the Middle East is that nevertheless continuity of rule of emperors was much stronger in the East than it was in the West. In the West, the empire virtually collapsed during the 5th century, particularly, and very rapidly after 420. Whereas in the East, there were also many very weak rulers, like Arcadius, like his son Theodosius II, but the continuity of the imperial rule itself remained in place, and therefore it was possible to create a bit different relationship between political and ecclesiastical leaders than in the West, where there was no strong ruler particularly during some periods between 7th and 9th century AD. So it was possible to create the principle of the so-called political orthodoxy in the East, which envisaged the emperor as the guardian of the faith, the guardian of the church, and also the guardian of the true interpretation of the Christian faith, with grave consequences also for circumstances in the Middle East, and also with grave consequences for the relationship between the imperial court, Constantinople, and religious minorities. These minorities were, of course, pagans, at the beginning at least, then the Jews, and some dissident Christian groupings, especially. The last key feature I must mention in the first part of my lecture is that there is an overall tendency in interpretation of the development of Christian church, and also in the interpretation of development of early Christian theology during the late antiquity, that we overestimate the political dimension of these controversies inside the church. We are tempted to say the politics was the main factor behind the controversies, behind the theological conflicts, but this is in part due our own inability, or perhaps also inability of our time, to understand the mentality, also the religious mentality of the late antiquity and his men. Because we must bear in mind that this was still an age of anxieties, and the relationships to the transcendence was quite different from our present day understanding of it. So it is impossible to say Constantine became Christian only for political reasons. Of course, he was very good, very cunning politician, but at the same time, he was also a child of his own time, and he was, in his own way, a deeply religious, deeply pious man. On the other hand, to give just two examples from the ancient or late antique Middle East, we can sincerely believe that Nestorius was horrified at the notion that the God Almighty himself should be crucified, and that this was his main motive for his theological stances in conflict with Cyril of Alexandria. At the same time, it is easily to understand, as Peter Brown did, that Egyptian population was sincerely concerned about the possibility that if we proclaimed that the God wasn't crucified, that it was a human being, Jesus Christ, who was crucified, that this would mean that God is far away from us again, like ancient gods were far away from us. So we shouldn't overestimate this political dimension of theological controversies of the 4th, 5th, and then also of 6th and 7th century. Although I admit it is also a danger that I'm doing this with my lecture, because I am, like Constantine was a man of his time, I am a man of my own time, and also for me it is quite difficult to grasp why these great theological questions should matter and why it was so important for so many people during this time to profess the true version of the faith. These are the main key features of the development of relationships between church and political authorities, which should be are also base for the development in the 5th till 7th century. Now we can make a walk through some landmarks in this development, with particular emphasis on the development in the Middle East. I must also say that the rise of Christian church, the rise of importance of Christian bishops particularly, didn't start with Constantine, but it's probably a result of some longer process that started already at about 250 Christian era, when there was the so-called Reichskrise of the Roman Empire, and many aspects of what we would call public sector today collapsed, and this was then the space for Christian church to fill, because Christian church had an advantage because it was used to live without subsidies by the states, which pagan cults weren't. And I think there is really very important development in the second half of the 3rd century, which then led to explosion at the beginning of the 4th century. Many of these landmarks are well known. The Council of Nicaea is certainly the one attempt of Constantine to fix problems of the Christian church emerging from the one factor he didn't reckon with, that is that Christian church isn't a unified, a monolithic body. And in this he of course failed, because the Council of Nicaea at one hand created a strong common identity for many Christians, but at the same time alienated many other Christians, and also strengthened their own particular identities. And like I said, after Constantine, no emperor was in position to impose solutions and to enjoy such authority as Constantine did, at least in many circles immediately after his conversion. And this is also visible in the development during the early rule of Emperor Theodosius, since it can be said, together with the already mentioned Hans-Georg Beck, that Edict of Thessalonica in 380, which is nowadays considered as the document which proclaimed Christianity as in its Nicene form as a kind of state religion of the Roman Empire, was more an initiative of the bishop than an initiative by Theodosius himself. He certainly played a role during the First Council of Constantinople a year after, and also contributed, which is perhaps a paradoxon since he was a Westerner, but he contributed to the establishment of Constantinople as the second most important ecclesiastic see in the Christian world, and thus establishing the role of Constantinople for centuries to come. But then again, the synagogue affair in Callinicum, in the present-day Iraq, in 388, already showed all the limits of imperial authority in church matters. Political orthodoxy and the exalted rule of emperor in the East put aside, because Theodosius, who was planning to do the right thing as a ruler of the entire Roman Empire and as a ruler of all its people, when he ordered the Bishop of Callinicum to pay for the reconstruction of synagogue the local Christians demolished, but Theodosius wasn't able to overcome fierce opposition, especially by the Bishop of Milan, Ambrosius, who in many ways fought in an ancient way when he understood this case as a kind of fight between gods, or at least between different religions, and for him it was inconceivable that the followers of true religion should compensate for a loss of a temple or a place of worship of the religion which is not true. So this particular event in the Middle East already marked limits of politics in mingling with religious affairs. Of course, it is interesting that after that, Theodosius, for some 2 years or 3 years, attempted to distance himself from Ambrosius in particular, and from the church leaders, and during this period appointed more pagans or several pagans to important offices of the Roman Empire. But this was to no avail, since after the even more well-known case of Thessalonica in 390, he changed the course again. Then, if we move to the 5th century, the 5th century itself is, of course, the period of the height of Christological controversy inside the church, and also the period when the Middle East played a pivotal role, because these controversies, perhaps as Richard Lehm underscored, as opposed to the Arian controversy of the 4th century, which focused on the question of relationships, particularly between Father in the Son and the Son in the Holy Trinity. These controversies were much more widespread and engulfed also the general population. And the general population in different parts of Middle East vividly took part in these controversies and discussions. And here also the role of Constantinople came to the fore, because the solutions were seen in the Middle East as solutions imposed from the center. Although Nestorius himself was for a brief time Patriarch of Constantinople, or Archbishop of Constantinople, and ultimately then had to bow, or was to be removed due to the pressure of population of Constantinople. And after that, the solution to the question of nature of Christ was seen in his strongholds, particularly in Syria, as imposed from the center, from the Constantinople. Like if today some solution would be proposed in Ljubljana and then Maribor wouldn't accept it because it was made up in Ljubljana. And it must be admitted that many explanations of the victory of Nestorianism, the so-called Nestorianism, this is of course a Western term for the some current of Christian thought which emphasized the human nature in Christ. In Syria, in parts of Syria, was interpreted as a rejection of a Constantinopolitan solution. This was after the Council of Ephesus, when the view of Nestorius was condemned, and led to gradual emergence of a particular Christian community, which is nowadays called Church of the East. But there was another current of Christian thought on the other part of understanding of Christian nature, of nature of Christ, and this was particularly popular in Egypt, and in some parts of Syria. And this current emphasized, of course, the divine nature of Christ, but especially while there was an already mentioned fear that too much emphasis on human nature of Christ would mean that God would be placed once again far away from man. So the Christian emperors in Constantinople tried to serve as guardians of political orthodoxy in both of these controversies by endorsing the Council of Ephesus in 431, and then by imposing the solution to Christological controversies at the Council of Chalcedon, which is still the base of the faith of the creed of majority of Christians today. But they weren't particularly successful, especially in eastern provinces of their realm, and this controversy continued, and next 2 centuries are actually the period of trying to fix the problems created by Council of Chalcedon. There were 2 interesting separate developments, also in connections with this role of Christian empire in Constantinople as a guardian of the true faith, who expected to have an unified monolithic Christian community. One development was in regarding to the Jews, because of course the new role of the emperor as guardian of the church put him also in position where he needed to answer the challenge of the existence of Jews. And I told about this during the last symposium. This is, in my opinion, actually the greatest theological challenge Christianity ever faced in its history, because this relationships to Judaism is really complicated. And so it also came that, of course, Judaism wasn't prohibited and couldn't be prohibited by Christian emperors, but there is an ongoing debate in scholarship how much the position of Jews deteriorated after the Christianization of the Roman Empire, after the emperor took his new role as guardian of the church, and after especially the establishment of political orthodoxy in Constantinople. And of course, one indicator for this is that in 425, Theodosius the second, not the first, suppressed the patriarchal office for the Jews, which was in existence for many decades before that in Palestine. On the other hand, one separate development, which is also in connection to the Near East in broader sense, is the fact that Armenian Apostolic Church is even today regarded as monophysite, is mainly due to pure political circumstance that in 451 the Armenian nobility faced the challenge of the Persian masters, to whom they were in principle loyal, and had to fight the famous Battle of Vartanats, or Avarai, in the present-day northwestern Iran. That meant that Armenian delegation wasn't able to attend the Council of Chalcedon, and then Armenian Church never accepted the canons of Council of Chalcedon due to political reasons in first place. Also, other attempts by the emperors from the 5th till 7th century to reconcile eastern provinces, which were by then monophysitic or Nestorian in our language, failed. Mainly only alienated new groups of population. For example, the attempted solution by the Emperor Justinian with condemnation of the 3 chapters backfired in the West, and probably then also weakened position of Byzantium in the West forever. And also the last attempt at the solution before the height of Arab conquest in 638 also wasn't successful, resulting in many problems again with the West. The final question, of course, is, and it was asked many times, did these theological controversies, did this failure of emperors to reconcile the eastern provinces of the empire to Constantinople facilitate the Arab conquest? I think it is impossible to answer this question. There are very few basis for doing that. There are very few cases of explicit inloyalty of the Christian population of eastern provinces of the Near East during the Arab conquest. Maybe there is a case where the conquest was really followed by a rapid Islamization. In this case is northwestern Africa after the Arab conquest in 697. But this was area where the official Catholic form of Christianity was imposed in the 5th century, and also the parallel church hierarchy didn't survive for very long. This wasn't the case in the Near East, where parallel hierarchy existed. And to conclude, we can say that the complicated relationship between church and the Roman Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, directly translated to the present-day situation of Christian churches in the present-day Middle East, because every single particular church is a result of one development or another during the 5th and 7th century. There is no time to elaborate on that, but I should only mention two interesting different developments in Egypt and Syria. In Egypt, the monophysitic, the Coptic version of Christianity prevailed, and this church became the national church of Egyptians and remained so, and probably the majority of Egyptian population belonged to it until the high Middle Ages. And the Greek Orthodox Church was ever only a church of Greek-speaking minority. On the other hand, in Syria, where monophysites were also very strong, and it was also visible that Arab conquest actually led to some betterment of their position. In the long run, lost battle for predominance among the Syrian Christians with the Greek Orthodox or so-called Melkite Church. The reason for that could be that, as opposed to the Egyptian Greek Orthodox Church, the Syrian Greek Orthodox Church, which is nowadays called Roman Orthodox Patriarchate of Antioch, very quickly adapted to new realities, adopted Arabic as language of liturgy, and even today, the Roman Orthodox Patriarchate of Antioch is the most Arabic of all Orthodox churches in the Near East, as opposed to the Orthodox Church of Jerusalem, and also as opposed to the Greek Orthodox Church and Patriarchate of Alexandria. And with that very visible heritage of the relationships between religion and politics in the late antique Middle East, I will also conclude my lecture. Thank you.